Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving deep today into something absolutely foundational and, well, pretty fascinating. The core principles and guiding objectives that have shaped India's foreign policy ever since it gained independence.
Exactly.
Think of it as understanding the blueprint, the DNA, of how one of the world's largest democracies interacts with the global stage.
Indeed. And we've got a source text here that really lays out the key ideas, the essential historical context, and the evolution of India's approach.
Mm.
It's not just about what India aimed for. It gives us a fantastic roadmap to understanding the why behind it all, the deep historical, philosophical, and frankly, practical roots.
Absolutely. So consider this deep dive your shortcut, maybe, to understanding the bedrock of India's international relations. We're going to explore the big ideas that informed its stance on, well, everything, really.
Global peace, colonialism.
Right, tackling colonialism, dealing with its immediate neighbors, and even navigating that incredibly complex path to becoming a nuclear power. How did a newly independent nation, starting from a position of, let's face it, immense challenge and vulnerability, manage to chart such a distinctive course?
Yeah.
And maintain it.
That's the key question. And what we'll see, I think, is how these fundamental principles, largely formulated during India's earliest formative years, have shown this remarkable continuity.
Like stuck around.
They have, while also, crucially, demonstrating an impressive ability to adapt, to evolve as circumstances changed, both at home and internationally. It's a powerful example, really, of a nation balancing its enduring ideals with the often harsh realities of, a complex world. What stands out to you as we start digging into these ideas?
Well, to truly grasp the why behind India's foreign policy, we absolutely have to set the scene historically. Our source points out, quite rightly, that any nation's foreign policy is profoundly shaped by its history and its domestic situation. And for India, this meant beginning its journey as an independent nation under incredibly difficult circumstances, right after August 1947. I mean, this wasn't exactly a gentle entry onto the world stage.
No, precisely. Internally, the situation was extraordinarily challenging. You can even say traumatic.
Yeah.
You had the deep wound of partition, the division of British India into India and Pakistan.
A brutal separation.
Brutal. And it wasn't just a political line on a map, right?
No.
It created this lasting legacy of hostility, of ill will with Pakistan, its brand new neighbor. Economic units that had worked together for centuries were suddenly fragmented, industries cut off from raw materials, trade routes disrupted, just widespread economic chaos.
And on top of this,
The gigantic humanitarian crisis, rehabilitating millions upon millions of Hindus and Sikhs displaced from Pakistan, arriving in India, needing everything, food, shelter, a way to start over. The scale was just unimaginable.
and the instability wasn't just social or economic, was it? Very soon after independence, the country was plunged into conflict in Kashmir.
Right. The source describes it as essentially a war imposed on India by Pakistan supporting tribal invaders.
So, an immediate military conflict demanding resources when the nation was barely on its feet.
Exactly. And internally, you also had significant economic threats from widespread strikes, organized by leftist political elements.
So, day one, mass displacement, economic disruption, military confrontation, all at once.
And you have to remember India's actual military strength at that moment in 47.
Right. Potential versus reality.
Huge potential, vast population resources,
Yeah.
but actual military and economic strength, pretty limited. It would take time and investment to build that up.
And facing a hostile Pakistan right away just compounded the security problem.
Absolutely. From the very beginning.
And we shouldn't forget those lingering bits of European colonialism. Even after the British left, you still had French and Portuguese pockets.
Right, scattered across the subcontinent. India initially tried diplomacy, negotiation to integrate them peacefully.
Which worked with the French, mostly.
Relatively smoothly, yeah. But the Portuguese pockets, especially Goa, that was different.
Took direct action.
It did. Despite diplomatic efforts, military action was ultimately needed as late as December 1961 to liberate Goa, Daman, and Diu.
So consolidation, removing colonialism, that stretched well into the first couple of decades.
Definitely. And internationally, the timing of independence. Wow. It couldn't have been more challenging or pivotal.
Right at the dawn of the Cold War.
Exactly. The U.S.-Soviet relationship was deteriorating incredibly fast. The world was polarizing, demanding allegiance.
Two armed camps.
And India had to define its place, navigate this hardening global environment while juggling all those massive internal and regional pressures. It was an incredibly complex, volatile backdrop,
And right into the heart of that steps Jawaharlal Nehru.
a towering, complex figure. The source really emphasizes his unique role.
Not just the first prime minister.
No, crucially, he was also the foreign minister for over 17 formative years, until his death in '64.
So his personal vision, his intellectual journey, it left a huge imprint, didn't it?
An indelible imprint, absolutely. On the country's foreign policy thinking, its practice, everything.
And the source gives us some really fascinating glimpses into his thinking, the layers.
It does. A rich but complex blend of influences. While he was at Cambridge, Fabian socialism had a strong impact.
That gradualist democratic socialism.
Right. But then, after World War I, Mahatma Gandhi, nonviolence, truth, that became profound. And the source notes this Gandhian influence led Nehru, way back in 1923, to condemn both Marxism and fascism. He saw them as different sides of the same coin, insensate violence and intolerance.
Yet he also engaged with international leftist movements, anti-imperial movements.
He did. In 1927, the Brussels Conference of Oppressed Nationalities. He met leftists from all over, started thinking about cooperation among colonial peoples against imperialism.
And he specifically condemned British and American imperialism then.
Yes. And later that year, he visited Moscow and was initially, well, deeply impressed by Soviet progress.
Just 10 years after their revolution.
Exactly. The source says, for a time, he came under Soviet communism's influence to some extent. His pro-Marxian attitude even caused some Congress Working Committee members to resign in protest in '37. Shows how strong it was then.
But that positive view didn't last, did it?
No, the source is clear on that. He became significantly disillusioned. The Soviet-German pact in '39, the occupation of Finland, the sheer scale of violence under Stalin, it pained him greatly.
Led to a reevaluation.
A major one. While he kept a deep sympathy for socialist ideals, economic equality, social welfare after 1950, Nehru came to reject communism as a political system completely.
And he was critical of Indian communists, too.
Particularly critical of what he saw as their blind dependence on Moscow, even when he himself was more sympathetic towards the USSR earlier.
What's truly fascinating, as the source shows, is this persistent mix, these cross-currents in his thought.
Absolutely. While he was jailed by the British in the '40s, he studied Indian philosophy deeply, particularly the Vedanta.
That focus on ultimate reality, consciousness.
Right. And he combined that with a strong influence from modern European humanism, reason, ethics, flourishing independent of religion.
Which created a paradox, didn't it? He insisted he was an atheist.
Yet he wasn't a philosophical materialist. He acknowledged dimensions beyond the purely physical. It's this combination, Indian philosophy, European humanism, socialist ideals, rejecting communism and fascism, that's key to his worldview.
Bandapatiya, quoted in the source, sums him up well.
He does. Simultaneously, a devout nationalist freedom fighter, loving Indian tradition, and a deeply committed internationalist, envisioning a unified mankind, a cooperative one world.
So fierce Indian nationalism alongside this visionary global ideal.
A powerful blend. And Michael Britcher, another scholar mentioned, suggests maybe Nehru couldn't fully synthesize these sometimes contradictory influences into one perfectly coherent pattern.
Which might explain some of the practical challenges, applying high principles to messy reality.
It might. Something Nehru himself admitted, laying down principles is easy, acting on them is incredibly difficult.
He definitely wrestled with realism versus idealism.
He did. He saw pure realism, narrow self-interest as leading to conflict, short-sightedness. The realist looks at the tip of his nose, he said.
Stumbling all the time.
Exactly. Yet he also called idealism the realism of tomorrow, suggesting high principles could shape a better future.
But ultimately,
the source suggests he believed foreign policy needed to be approached in a spirit of realism, acknowledging practicalities, power dynamics, even while being heavily influenced by Gandhi's idealism and moral values.
that tightrope walk between idealism and pragmatism.
Crucial, absolutely crucial to understanding the policies and principles India actually adopted. Given that incredibly challenging start, the stark realities of the Cold War, and Nehru's complex philosophy, what were the specific concrete goals India set for itself? What did it actually want to achieve?
Our source is quite explicit here. The number one overriding goal has always been maintaining and actively promoting international peace and security. And this wasn't just some abstract hope. For India, peace was an emergent necessity, as Nehru put it, a matter of urgent need. M.S. Rajan called it a primary desideratum.
That phrase, emergent necessity, is so important to grasp. For a country like India, facing immense internal challenges, needing all its limited resources for development, for food, clothing, shelter, economic growth.
Lifting millions out of poverty.
Exactly. External peace wasn't a luxury. It was an absolute prerequisite. Any major conflict, any big diversion of resources to defense would cripple those vital development efforts.
Potentially destabilize the whole nation.
For sure. So promoting peace wasn't just idealism. It was fundamentally pragmatic self-interest.
And the approach wasn't passive, right? Not just staying out of trouble.
No, the source calls it a positive, constructive approach, actively trying to reduce tensions, mediate disputes, build cooperation.
And these goals, while pragmatic, also lined up with India's constitution and values.
Deeply aligned. Mushkun Dubey is quoted noting that while national interest, security, sovereignty, prosperity is always primary,
Of course.
foreign policy should also serve the broader purpose of promoting global peace, disarmament, a stable, fair global order.
Okay, but isn't there a tension there? National security versus global peace.
There can seem to be, but the source suggests that in the medium to long run, promoting that stable, equitable global order actually serves the national interest too.
A more peaceful world is better for India.
Exactly. Safer, more stable, more prosperous.
Yeah.
So India's consistent message was, use peaceful methods to solve problems. Peace meant avoiding war, yes, but also reducing tension, ending the Cold War.
Which leads directly to India's strong support for the UN.
Extremely strong, unwavering support. The source calls it unqualified allegiance, seeing an effective UN as absolutely necessary for that cooperative world order.
The central vehicle, really.
Indispensable, and tied closely to that is disarmament.
Especially nuclear disarmament.
Hugely important. Conventional disarmament efforts had failed. The nuclear era made the threat infinitely greater. So a major, enduring objective, comprehensive global disarmament, eliminate nukes, reduce conventional arms.
And beyond direct peace and security, the source lists other big goals aimed at root causes of conflict.
Right. Liberating subject peoples, anti-colonialism, and eliminating racial discrimination.
Seen as fundamental violations, inherently destabilizing.
Definitely. And achieving all this required, absolutely crucially, an independent foreign policy.
Not being a camp follower.
Exactly. No joining the U.S. or Soviet bloc, combined with total faith in the UN. So peace wasn't just one goal. It was the primary overarching objective, intertwined with self-interest, Gandhian ideals, and navigating the Cold War.
That Gandhian influence really comes through strongly.
It does. The source explicitly says Gandhian ethics was the cornerstone. Stressing moral values means over ends.
Never subordinate means to ends, as Nehru quoted Gandhi.
Right. Rejecting physical force as the ultimate arbiter. The method mattered as much as the outcome. This instilled that strong preference for peaceful methods, moral persuasion.
Finally, the source mentions an objective tied to India's internal struggles, but with global links. Eliminating want, disease, illiteracy.
Yes, primarily a domestic goal, obviously the huge task of nation building, but linked to foreign aid, international cooperation.
Working with agencies like WHO, FAO, UNICEF.
Exactly. Not just to get help for India, but also to contribute to fighting these problems globally, part of being a responsible member of the world community.
And the decision to stay in the Commonwealth, also listed as an objective.
A pragmatic choice. Even as a republic, recognizing the Queen only as head of the Commonwealth, India saw mutual benefit in associating with countries sharing that particular way of life. Parliamentary democracy, certain institutions.
Continued engagement, not total separation.
Right. So you look at this whole package piece for development, anti-colonialism, racial equality, UN support, Gandhian ethics. It's a clear mix.
Pragmatic national interest, high ideals.
And recognizing interconnected global challenges. Maintaining friendly relations, avoiding alliances, non-alignment, peaceful settlement, universal brotherhood. These were the core drivers.
Okay, so with those big objectives, clear peace, independence, a better global order, how did India actually do foreign policy day to day? What were the core principles guiding its actions?
Well, the most important one, arguably India's biggest contribution to international relations, thinking back then, according to the source, is non-alignment.
Born out of the Cold War.
Directly. That intense U.S.-Soviet tension. In that polarizing climate, India made a very deliberate choice, not to align militarily or politically with either side.
And it wasn't just neutrality, was it? Not just staying out of it.
No, absolutely not passive. The source explains it was dictated, fundamentally, by national interest.
Needing help from everyone.
Needing friendship, trade, economic aid from multiple sources for development. Joining one bloc would cut off the other. But it was also driven by a strong moral belief, rooted in Gandhi friendship among all, pursuing world peace.
Joining a bloc would hinder that peace role.
Exactly. Create antagonism. And crucially, non-alignment was about preserving the absolute freedom to judge international issues independently, on their merits.
Based on India's own values and interests.
Right. Joining a bloc meant losing that freedom, having to toe the alliance line.
Geography played a big part too, surely.
Oh, definitely. India's size, its location junction of Southeast Asia, Middle East, Indian Ocean dominance, that long border with China.
Made staying out of military alliances seem essential.
Imperative, almost. Drawing a superpower rivalry right onto its borders felt way too risky.
There's that interesting quote from Chester Bowles, the U.S. ambassador.
Yeah, fascinating perspective. He saw the strategic logic for the West and India staying non-aligned.
How so?
He argued if Nehru had joined the West, he'd alienate anti-colonial Asia, look like a stooge. By staying independent, he leveraged Indian nationalism and could credibly point out Asian communists' reliance on Moscow or Beijing.
Making him potentially more effective against communism that way.
A striking strategic insight, yeah.
Okay, moving on from non-alignment. Panchsheel and peaceful coexistence.
This reflects that deep Indian idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The world is one family.
Promoting one world, where different systems can live together peacefully.
Exactly. And it was formally articulated in the 1954 agreement with China about Tibet trade.
That laid down the 5 principles Panchsheel.
Right. Mutual respect for territory and sovereignty, non-aggression, non-interference, equality and mutual benefit, and peaceful coexistence.
Nehru thought these could solve a lot of the world's problems if adopted widely.
He did. The term Panchsheel became an international coin, as he put it. It got picked up in major declarations like at Bandung in '55, even by the UN General Assembly later.
Showing its resonance.
Definitely. Though the source notes the term comes from ancient Buddhist principles for individual conduct.
Okay.
But the 1954 Panchsheel were clearly principles for state behavior, basic expectations for civilized nations.
It's striking, though. The source immediately follows this by noting the violation.
Yeah. China encroaching on Indian territory soon after, building the Aksai-Chin Road.
Undermining the spirit.
And then the 1962 aggression. A clear, devastating breach of mutual non-aggression by China itself.
Yet India remained committed to the principles.
That's what the source states. India saw them as enduring ideals, even when one partner failed so dramatically.
And peaceful coexistence, especially in the Cold War context.
Meant accepting that different systems must and can exist side by side. Affirmed each nation's right to its own path. KPS Menon said it wasn't just co-endurance, but something that enriches the diversity of human society.
Nehru even linked it to democracy.
Yeah, rejecting coexistence was rejecting the democratic outlook, tolerating diversity.
Then there's anti-imperialism and anti-colonialism, deeply rooted in India's own experience.
A matter of profound faith, really. Having just emerged from British rule, India felt a moral imperative to oppose colonialism everywhere.
Supporting freedom struggles across Asia and Africa.
Absolutely. One of the first acts of the interim government, even before '47, was recalling Indian troops the British were using to suppress movements elsewhere in Asia.
Taking a stand against the Dutch in Indonesia, supporting movements in Indochina, Malaya, North Africa.
All across the board. Promoting self-determination was essential. India saw denying freedom not just as unjust, but a violation of human rights and a source of conflict.
Maybe even over-scrupulous sometimes, as Rajan put it.
Perhaps highlighting how deep the commitment was. And importantly, India disagreed fundamentally with the West on the main threat.
West saw communism, India saw
colonialism. India believed the real issue in Asia and Africa was colonialism versus anti-colonialism. And unaddressed colonialism could actually push people towards communism out of desperation.
Nehru said colonialism was the biggest threat, leading to communism.
Exactly. Ending colonial rule was the most urgent priority for justice and stability.
And the source brings us up to date with neo-colonialism.
Right. The idea that even after independence, Western powers use economic means, aid with strings, multinational corporations to exert control. A new form of economic slavery.
Which India is determined to oppose.
Still part of that struggle for genuine freedom. Another key principle. Opposition to racial discrimination.
Based on equality, dignity for all.
Firmly believed. Racialism seen as unjust, a source of conflict, a threat to peace.
South Africa and apartheid being the prime example.
The most egregious example. India gave full support to the victims. Kept diplomatic ties way back in 1949.
Pushed for sanctions via the non-aligned movement, the UN boycotted everything.
Right up until apartheid ended and Mandela's government came in early '94.
Yeah.
Only then were relations reestablished. India also consistently backed UN human rights covenants.
Okay, then the principle of seeking foreign aid while maintaining an independent policy. That sounds like a balancing act.
The crucial one, a delicate balance. India knew it desperately needed resources, tech, machinery for development. Internal resources weren't enough for the 5-year plans.
But non-alignment meant fierce independence. Sovereignty was paramount.
Absolutely. So India was adamant. No aid with strings attached that would compromise its independence or let others dictate policy.
Nehru said they'd rather delay development than submit to economic domination.
Making the priority crystal clear, this created a real dilemma, especially early on when the U.S. seemed the most likely aid source.
And the USSR wasn't expected to help a non-communist country initially.
Right. Despite pressure from some Indian business circles for foreign capital, the government resisted compromising. But then came the communist victory in China in '49.
The game changer.
Big time. It made India realize the danger of communism gaining ground within India if development didn't accelerate, and aid was essential for that speed.
And the U.S. realized it needed to help India, too.
Exactly. To prevent another communist success in Asia, a crucial democratic bulwark. So this confluence of factors started the flow of significant aid, initially mainly from the U.S.
But India consciously broadened its sources over time.
It did. World Bank, other Western countries, eventually the Soviet Union too, once their suspicion eased, later Germany, Japan, always trying to maintain balance to preserve independence.
Despite criticism sometimes of tilting one way or the other.
Always. And the source notes another big shift after liberalization in '91 and the Soviet collapse. India's economy moved closer to the capitalist world,
Leading to charges of a sellout to the World Bank, IMF.
Critics argued these institutions were guiding policy, despite government assertions of independence, shows the ongoing tension in that principle.
Then support for the United Nations. More than just an objective, a guiding principle.
Absolutely. A founder member, India consistently expressed full faith, seeing the UN system as indispensable for peace, security, cooperation.
And India's involvement was significant from the start.
Very active in the non-aligned group within the UN, sponsoring progressive measures, holding leadership posts like Mrs. Pandit as General Assembly President in '53, multiple terms on the Security Council.
And practical contributions too, like peacekeeping.
Notable contributions. Medical unit in Korea, chairing commissions in Korea and Indochina, sending troops to the Congo, Yugoslavia, demonstrating commitment to collective security.
India also pushed for universal UN membership, didn't it?
Played a key role, helping break the Cold War deadlock on new members in the mid-50s, and consistently advocating for the People's Republic of China's representation.
Based on principle, even after the '62 war with China.
It's exactly. Arguing the UN couldn't be truly universal without mainland China. A value-based stand maintained despite conflict.
Professor Satish Kumar is quoted saying India's contribution rivals any member, permanent or not.
Right. He argues this justifies India's claim for a permanent Security Council seat, perhaps even more strongly than Germany or Japan's claims.
Finally, the principle of peaceful settlement of international disputes.
Acknowledging disputes are inevitable, but emphasizing peaceful means. War's destructiveness, especially post-nuclear weapons, made peaceful settlement the only logical goal.
It's even in the Constitution, Article 51.
A directive principle for the state. India rejects negotiation through strength as illogical and dangerous in the modern era.
Because conflict impacts everyone.
Profoundly. So India made it a matter of faith to help seek peaceful settlement, its own disputes and others, carving out that conciliator role, even if seen as poking one's nose in.
And its faith in peaceful means wasn't shaken, even when wars were imposed on it.
That's what the source says. The commitment remained, even when tested by conflict with Pakistan and China, an enduring principle. Now, while these core principles laid that enduring foundation, foreign policy isn't static, right? New approaches emerge. The source discusses the Gujral Doctrine as an example, especially in the post-Cold War era.
Yes, I.K. Gujral, foreign minister in '96, then PM. The essence was India, as the big player in South Asia, extending unilateral concessions to neighbors.
Taking the lead to build trust, being generous, accommodating, often without demanding strict reciprocity immediately.
Aiming to improve relations through friendly gestures, people-to-people contacts, especially with Pakistan.
Exactly. create a positive atmosphere to eventually sort out differences more amicably, India acting like a responsible big neighbor helping smaller ones.
And there were concrete examples. The Ganga Waters Treaty with Bangladesh in '96.
Which gave Bangladesh slightly more water in the lean season than even a previous deal. Also, the confidence-building measures with China around the same time.
Freezing the border dispute, essentially, to let other relations grow.
Right. And in '97, those unilateral concessions for Pakistani tourists, easier visas, especially for elders, cultural groups, gestures of goodwill.
The source mentions the doctrine was widely believed to be authored by Bhani Sengupta.
Yes, described as a close friend and advisor to Gujral.
And the source briefly touches on some controversy around Sengupta himself.
It does. Mentions allegations presented as charges, not facts of him being a CIA agent, linked to him denouncing the '74 nuclear test.
Right. And also reports by Swapan Dasgupta about Sengupta's personal views.
Yes, views attributed to him, suggesting India might need initiatives like demilitarizing Siachen or even making the line of control in Kashmir, the international border, to improve ties with Pakistan.
Again, presented as reported views, not official policy, just context on the figure associated with the doctrine.
Exactly. Important distinction. Despite those specific points of discussion, the source says the Gujral doctrine itself was generally welcomed.
In India, by neighbors, international.
Yes, seen as an important new principle for the post-Cold War environment. Its significance showed when India and Pakistan identified 8 areas for negotiation in mid-'97, building on that atmosphere.
Okay, and finally, India's nuclear path. A critical strategic choice.
Huge. Nehru started atomic energy research right after independence, clearly as atom for peace, peaceful uses, power generation. Dr. Homi Bhabha leading it.
But the strategic calculation changed, especially after '71.
Significantly, the creation of Bangladesh, the realization that China, Pakistan's ally, could help Pakistan go nuclear.
And China itself went nuclear back in '64.
Right, so India faced the prospect of nuclear neighbors.
Yeah.
Felt compelled to seriously consider the option for its own security, deterrence.
Leading to the first test in '74, but declared a peaceful nuclear explosion.
Yes, perhaps due to international backlash, suggesting civilian applications.
But India consistently refused to sign the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Absolutely. Saw it as discriminatory, creating nuclear haves and have-nots, legitimizing the 5 powers' weapons while stopping others. Unjust.
So while overt weaponization was maybe paused after '74?
India kept the option deliberately open. Continued nuclear work, enrichment, power tech. Retained the capability.
The source says Rao and Gujral governments considered tests but didn't authorize them.
That's reported. But it was Prime Minister Vajpayee in May '98 who made the bold decision, as the source calls it.
Ordering 5 tests done in secrecy.
Exactly. Then India declared itself a nuclear weapons state.
Facing criticism, sanctions.
Significant international pressure. But Vajpayee stated India was a nuclear state, didn't need more tests, announcing a voluntary moratorium.
But pointedly not signing the NPT or the CTTT, the Test Ban Treaty.
Crucially, maintaining the principled stand against discriminatory regimes while operationalizing security needs, a significant public shift in balancing security and disarmament principles.
What's really remarkable, looking back at all this principles, objectives, doctrines, strategic choices, is the theme of continuity, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
The source notes that, like Britain, India adopted the tradition that basic foreign policy doesn't radically change just because the government changes.
A sign of maturity.
Presented that way, yeah. A tribute to the nation's maturity, leadership's wisdom. Even when figures with strong views, like Vajpayee as foreign minister back in '77 took office, the core objectives and principles held firm.
And the professional foreign service played a role in that continuity.
Providing valuable input, institutional memory, stability, absolutely.
So you see this robust foundation laid in those early years, influenced by history partition, nation building, security threats, domestic needs, Nehru's complex worldview, built on non-alignment, Panchsheel, anti-colonialism, UN support, guiding India through the Cold War and beyond.
Adapting with doctrines like Gujral's, making tough choices like the nuclear one, but generally maintaining that consistent commitment to independence, peace, a better global order.
It really paints a picture of balancing high ideals with pragmatic necessities. Consciously, painstakingly balancing them. Navigating a challenging world based on principles that have largely stood the test of time, even when challenged by conflict or global shifts, and enduring strength in that core vision.
So that wraps up our deep dive today into the core principles and objectives of India's foreign policy. We've journeyed from the foundational ideals shaped in the Nehruvian era through the guiding principles, later doctrines, and major strategic decisions.
We've seen how history, domestic needs, philosophy, and the changing world all combine to craft a foreign policy aimed at securing national interest, while, also striving for those broader goals: peace, equality, a cooperative global order.
Understanding these deep roots really gives you a powerful lens, doesn't it?
Right.
For viewing India's actions on the world stage over decades, understanding its stance on issues we still see today. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it naturally leads to a big question for you, the listener, to think about. As global challenges keep evolving so dramatically, climate, tech, new geopolitics, how might these historical principles and that inherent tension between national interest and universal ideals continue to shape India's role and choices going forward?
Something to definitely keep in mind as you watch international affairs unfold.